Good evening and welcome to our inaugural Toolkits fiction broadcast. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm broadcasting to you from stolen and unceded lands. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of this land. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to acknowledge that the violence of colonialism is ongoing. So thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Jennifer Down, and it's my great pleasure and privilege to facilitate Toolkits fiction this year. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, Toolkits is an intensive 12-week course for writers under 30. And it's run by Express Media, who you may know as the publisher of VoiceWorks magazine. You might also know them as the producer of events such as the Track series. They're a fantastic organisation for young writers, and if you're not already, I really encourage you to get involved with them in any way that you can. So the Toolkits program is digitally based, which means you can participate wherever you are, so long as you have an internet connection. We've almost reached the midpoint of fiction and non-fiction Toolkits programs, but later this year, Toolkits Poetry is open for applications. That'll be facilitated by the lovely Melody Paloma, and yeah, applications are open very soon. Speaking of applications, the John Marsden and Hachette Australia Prize, which is also administered by Express Media, is now open for submissions. I got my email the other day. I'm too old to enter, but you might not be. Entries close on the 29th of June, so you've got plenty of time. So we'll make a start. In our live broadcast, we're lucky to be joined by as always, a guest artist, and this evening we have the fabulous Mirandi Riwoe joining us to talk about crafting character in fiction. Mirandi is a Brisbane-based writer. Her beautiful novella, The Fish Girl, of which we have not one but two copies here this evening, it actually won Siege's Viva la Novella 5, was it? Is that right? The 5th iteration of that. Oh, Mirandi? That's okay, it wasn't a test.
I thought it might be 7. I think it might be 7.
Okay, the 7th iteration, let's say, of Siege's Viva la Novella Prize. It was recently shortlisted for Stella. Her debut crime novel, She Be Damned, was released last year, and this year she is Peril Magazine's prose editor. Her work has appeared in Best Australian Stories, Review of Australian Fiction, Rex, Peril, and Shibboleth and Other Stories, and she has received fellowships from the Queensland Literary Awards and Griffith Review. Mirandi has a PhD in creative writing and literary studies from 2UT. Thank you so much for joining us, Mirandi.
Thank you for having me, Jen.
Cool. It's, for those of you who might not know, Mirandi is as busy as ever, but she was just in Sydney last Thursday for the Stella Awards ceremony, and she was kind enough to be emailing with me back and forth about this broadcast as late as Thursday morning. So.
Oh yeah, we're looking forward to both.
So this evening, Mirandi and I are going to do a bit of a Q&A, and we'll have a little chat about the way we write character. Please feel free to ask questions via Twitter using the hashtag EMToolkits, that's the letters EM Toolkits, or via the Express Media Facebook page, and I will do my best to field them as they come in. So Mirandi, I wanted to ask you, this is a bit of a general question to kick things off, but what is your approach like when it comes to writing character or crafting character in fiction?
Just generally, I think, Jen, you mentioned you usually like to move on from character. You grow your story from the character. And so I had to think about this, and I would say I'm probably more plot-driven in that, as an example, with Mina, so she was born from Somerset Maugham short story that marginally mentions this Malay trollop, and I wanted to write a story about her trajectory of the same story, but from her point of view. So she was sort of born from that, and obviously I could have there were various kinds of characters I could have chosen for her to be that woman, but I did want to start out at a sort of baseline with her. That's and a bit sort of unaware of the dangers in life, I guess, you know. With the crime novel, with Heloise, I would say with her I had to consider, so she's set in the Victorian period, so I had to consider a character that authentic male who had the dependence to be able to detect. So I had to, so she around that. And also I like to always, not always, that's not true, I like to write about, because I'm direct, and I like to write on purpose sort of research the Chinese London hundreds, so I can sort of incorporate that. So each of those characters is crafted to fit the plot. The other, I was thinking about it, the other thing I do maybe with exam short fiction. What I like to do is interesting. And then,
sorry, Mirandi, we're just having a little bit of the audio. Are you able? Sorry, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, we're going to have a special on-air tech troubleshooting session. Could I just get you to try dropping your bandwidth down? And the way you do that is by, so at the top of your screen, there should be like a little, it looks like a Wi-Fi, like a little...
I've got it at the bottom of the screen, I think.
Okay.
Internet access, yep.
And it will say, oh no, sorry, this will be at the top of your Google Hangouts.
Oh, okay, Google Hangout. Oh, yeah.
Yep, there's a little gear.
Adjust bandwidth usage, yep.
Drop your bandwidth down to a lower setting.
Medium? Is that better?
Let's try medium, and we'll see how we go. Sorry, we just...
Well, that's low, that's low. How about, so I've got medium or low?
We can actually hear you a lot better now, so let's stick with this.
Low, okay.
Could you just go back? I'm sorry, I think we started to lose it after you said...
yeah, there were some Star Wars sounds going on in the background.
Very exciting. We're talking about Eloise.
Oh, okay, yes. So what I was saying is I needed her to sort of be authentic to the Victorian period, but she also needed to be of interest to contemporary readers. And also, so I needed a character that was independent enough in that period to be able to detect being a female, because a lot of females, of course, in that era were restricted. So I guess before even I started to write the plot, I did come up with the character, but then because it's crime fiction, then it's plot driven after that, if you know what I mean. And then I was saying, the other thing I do is sometimes I will build a character to suit a theme that I'm trying to examine, especially in, say, short fiction and literary short fiction. So I might, so anything maybe to do with racism or something that I've seen that's interesting or unfair. So like one short story I had in the Margaret River one was about a girl. So it was sort of inspired by that notion of that women have to be curfewed because of male, violence against women, but the women are the ones curfewed. And then just a suburb over. So another short story was, a suburb over, there was this woman sort of saying racist things to this kid, and I've got teenage boy about the same age, and that sort of, so it's things that get under your skin and what you might sort of be preoccupied with yourself. That then I did for those stories, I definitely built the character towards the theme. But I would say, maybe apart from what I was saying about Heloise, mostly I wouldn't write a story that develops from the character. Yeah, I find that very interesting idea, but no, I would say mostly I don't.
No, I think from what I've heard, because character is something I could talk about all day, it's endlessly fascinating to me. And I think from what I've heard, yours is maybe the more typical or the more normal approach.
Yeah, no, I have heard some writers, you know, and especially that idea of, you know, what would the character do, and that propels the story. And I'd love to try it. I would love to try it. One day when I have a spare moment, I will experiment with that. And it's good to experiment too, of course. That's the other thing. It is good to experiment. That's the other thing that any writer should get out of these things, is experiment with all sorts of different ways of doing things.
Yeah, the novel that I'm working on at the moment, I've kind of had to, it's much more plot driven than anything else I've written before. And so it's still, I guess, character based, but increasingly I'm trying to sort of map the character against these specific plot points. And it's the first time I've done that. And it's, that is for me kind of experimentation, and it's been really interesting. Like, it's been a real challenge, but I think I've learned a lot from doing it that way as well. It's more restrictive in some ways, and also I have a lot more freedom in other ways. Yeah,
that's true.
Was there anything that you learned about, so I'm talking about The Fish Girl partly because it's so beautiful, and partly because our Toolkits participants read a section of it for, you know, ahead of this week's broadcast. But I'm wondering, was there anything that you kind of learned about Mina as you were writing the book? Was there anything that kind of announced itself to you about her character as you went, or was she sort of fully fleshed out from the beginning?
No, so originally I wrote Mina as part of a short story. So it was in a sort of this irritated response to when I read the short story, which I was reading as part of my research into the crime novel, actually. Just I wanted to see the colonial period, how other people wrote about colonial period Southeast Asia. So the short story, obviously that was less, you know, less sort of pillowed, less, you know, made out. And then a couple of years later, I went to it and I decided I would cushion it to sort of be a fuller story, have a fuller character. I honestly can't remember how I came up with how she has eczema on her legs. You know how these things just sort of, which is what I was going to say earlier, what you were saying about trying to, sometimes the character, you're trying to sort of make it do what the plot needs it to do. I was thinking earlier about, I think for me what happens with characters, I think about them for a long time before I write them, and they develop in my mind. And maybe because I'm also plot driven, I know where I want the story to go. So as an example, at the moment, I'm writing a historical novel, a literary novel set in North Queensland in the gold rush period. And there's a brother in there that was supposed to be a minor character. And he was supposed to be just that big brother, Aussie kind of character. But he developed to become more maybe criminal-like. And then he became more, now I've got him, we don't know if it's mental illness or if he's seeing ghosts, you know. So, and that's been a really interesting, so he's now developed into one of the more major characters, one of the more interesting characters. So I think that's because in my mind, he needed to do more for the plot. You know what I mean? So anyway, Mina, so I think what happened is somebody was interviewing me and asked if the eczema was to show she sort of was scaly, like the Ocean Queen. And I was like, I'm keeping that, but it's not true. I think maybe at the time I probably developed that I wanted her to be quite exiled from everyone, which is what happens to these women when they're taken away from their villages and their families and then put into this other world. So I think I just, and so she could visit the Ocean Queen. So the other thing is, I noticed, and I didn't mean necessarily for it to happen, but I did notice through writing it, there was one point, so first she gets very sort of irritated with the cook, like she gets quite annoyed and angry with the cook, which she probably wouldn't have dared before, but she's just been sort of pushed to a limit. And then I noticed later she didn't want to go to that other person's house to make the rice porridge, and she was sort of popping nuts in it, you know, like eating as she was sort of cooking, which she mightn't have dared before. So I did notice as I wrote it, she became more bold. Yeah, so things like that do sort of develop as you write your thoughts, I think.
Yeah, that's one of the things about this novella, is that it achieves such kind of profound character development in a very compressed narrative. I mean, the narrative itself takes place over some time, but it's really it's a very slim little book. And
yes,
yeah, we see this huge change happen to Mina. And at the beginning, she's quite, she's quite timid and she's quite naive. And there's a lot of withheld information, or there's a lot of stuff that she withholds from other people. And at the end, she's still withholding certain things, but you're right, there's a boldness to her. And there's that scene at the end where she sort of dares to step outside. I don't want to put any spoilers out there, but she dares to step outside the ship's cabin, knowing that, you know, there's a good chance she may be seen. And I was quite surprised the first time I read this when she did that. And then I thought, no, it's perfectly in line with her having had these various experiences and encountered all of these people in, you know, a relatively short amount of time. You grow up quickly in that situation. Yeah,
and I think also with a lot of, I think just from when I was young, I think you think people, this is what I wanted me to, you know, when she gets on the boat, she thinks they're all going to be happy to see her again, but they're not, because it's a different context. Yeah. I think young people might see things more sort of happily than they are, you know, like she doesn't realize how threatened she is, or she's so appeasing or wants friendship so much she doesn't see the danger she's stepping into. So that's what I was kind of trying to portray. And also, of course, because the captain is actually fond of her, so she has that sort of security.
Yeah, she really has no freedom, but in terms of that one relationship, she has this sort of narrow sense of liberty that permits these incremental freedoms, I guess.
Yeah.
What is something that you kind of find really difficult or challenging when it comes to writing character?
Writing character? I think one of the questions to consider was what irritates me in character, you know, in books. I probably don't like to read too much interiority, or, you know, too much telling. I prefer to see it shown through dialogue or action or reaction. So sometimes, maybe, especially if it's in third person, I withhold too much interiority. So sometimes I'm told, like, you know, we need to know more about her, you know, like they want more of what she's actually thinking or he's actually thinking. But that's just my own bias. I like to sort of work it out as I go as a reader. Yeah, and I guess the other difficulty is just getting a well-rounded character, which I think you can only get. I mean, there's only so many. You remember there used to be, well, there probably still are, but there are those questionnaires you can have for character, like what colour's their hair and what hobbies they have. For me, I mean, that's all right, but for me, like I was saying earlier, these characters need to develop over a long time, and I keep notes, and it might be something I notice somebody else doing, or a lot of my characters love their food. But yeah, no, so I think having well-rounded character is always a challenge. Yeah, and interiority. What about I've got something here. Oh, and the other thing is to know the best way to convey your character. So I know with Heloise, when I started her, she was third person, past tense, and it just became really, you know, like a crinoline romance almost, that sort of feel. And I didn't want that feel. I wanted it to be more contemporary. So then, and that's when the redrafting comes in, I guess. Like I had to then look at, I think I brought it to present tense, and as soon as I put it to present tense, then I did it in first person point of view. I immediately got more interiority. Like I find, especially first person, you immediately, for me, when I'm writing, get more into the character's head. So I think that's another thing is working out the best way for you as a writer to convey who your character is and what they're trying to say. So a lot of, again, what we were saying, a lot of experimentation and redrafting. Yeah.
I think that's a really important point as well, this idea that that none of this exists in a vacuum. So we can sit tonight, you know, for instance, and talk about character, but there's that intersection between that and what we might term narrative voice, and you know, the fact that first person often does make it easier for you to access that interior voice, or to spend a little bit more reflective or close time in that intimate way with the character. And so I think that's a really important point to mention, is that none of these sort of elements of craft, as we might like to call them, exist in isolation. And it's really important to kind of, when we're problem solving and thinking, you know, why am I finding this hard, or why is this not working maybe so well as it could be, how can I make this character stronger, is to kind of take that three-dimensional approach to it.
Yeah. And I think also, like I was saying, it's important to also know what you're trying to do with the story, what you're trying to maybe say, what you're, you know, like say with the fish girl, originally I really wanted her to be nameless to sort of represent many women. And I tried first person. I think that sort of limited point of view, third person, was best for her, because then there's some mystery, I guess, surrounding her. Or so you really have to decide what's best for each character too. I mean, you know, and you'll see brilliant books like Strout and Jennifer Egan, and they'll have all different characters doing different things from different styles, you know, and you really need to choose what's the best style. And sometimes the hard thing is, and I'm with a writer's group, the hard thing is sometimes it's just a lot of trying this and that, going back, and it's tedious, but sometimes that's what it takes.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Do you have, speaking of trying, do you have any sort of exercises or things that you do when you get stuck writing?
Yeah, I did. I gave this one some thought. So I usually work in a linear fashion, like my books. I know some people write, I think they write chunk here and chunk there, and then maybe, you know, do that sort of structural origin. I like to write it from A to B, like they start here and they're going there. That's how I like to write. So the one thing I do is I like to keep the motor running for the next day. So I think it was Hemingway. He says, don't finish your scene like with nothing to go on with. You know, like that sounds very neat. And I think he's right. And so what I do is I write however words I want to write, and then I leave like little notes on what I'm going to write for the next morning. And then I don't sit there the next morning and go, oh, reread, where am I up to? What's she going to do next? Like, I really like, that really works for me. So I would say first I would do that. I asked a friend once, because I was a bit stuck on getting started on something, and she said, because I like writing about it, she said, Mirandi, write about food. So I just find, or she said sex, but I don't like writing about that. So, but, you know, she said go straight to, so that does work. Like I said, I like to work linear, but that does actually work too. And the good thing is then you have that ready for when you get up to that point. Like you're like, oh, I've written this scene. So that's nice. But sometimes there are scenes in your mind that are more evolved than where you might be up to. So, you know, so maybe you could start there and go back again. And I do find sometimes, even if it's just a sentence that's awkward or just a note, if you go back to the next day, and you've probably thought about it a bit, when you go back to the next day, it's much easier to iron out.
Yes.
So you got to give yourself time too. So I do. That's what I do when I get stuck.
Yeah, I think the time is particularly important as well. Like, I think this idea that we sort of think of writer's block as being this time that we spend in front of a laptop or a notebook, not doing anything. But I think, I don't know, when I'm teaching, I always say that reading is writing, and just sitting with the work. Even if you're riding your bike somewhere or you're walking to the milk bar, that's still writing in a way.
It is, and taking your notes.
Yeah, note taking, all of that stuff. As long as you're thinking about it, it's all time well spent.
I know Mirelle Day was telling us when I did a residency with her. She was saying she spends a lot of time lying on her couch with her head, on one of the arms. And she said, and in that arm, she said, there's so many ideas soaked in there, because she'll just, and that is a lot of writing. A lot of writing is actually just that sort of thinking about it, And then the other half is procrastinating, so you don't have to go to it.
Yes. No, but I feel like half of my first novel was written in the car driving to and from, tape for uni or work.
Yes.
I was always stuck in traffic. Oh, good. It's very pretty.
Very pretty.
Sorry, the lights here go off on my
disco.
It's very David Lynch there for a second.
And it is very is it a bowerbird? Like you do have to sort of pick up things as you go. And I know I've got another good friend, Laura Elvery, and and sometimes you'll be like, that's mine, or that I'll be thinking it anyway. So,
careful about being friends with writers.
I know. And actually, I even had a sticker the other day that I had to take off the wall and it wasn't because we discussed it, but she put this brilliant thing in one of her short stories that I'd had just to stick it on as just an idea for one day, and I was just like, I had to take it off the wall. Elvery's used it.
That book is beautiful as well.
I know. She did use it much better than I would have.
Was not casting aspersions. But no, her short stories, the collection's called Trick of the Light. And it's very, very beautiful.
It's skillful, yes.
Yeah. I was going to ask if you talked a little bit about things that irritate you as far as characters go, but is there anything that, do you have any particularly memorable characters in fiction that really have stayed with you over time?
Look, I thought about this, and what I did is I've collected a few books here of books I've read lately that and I thought I might discuss how I think they've done character well. Yeah. I mean, in the long run, if I'm going to talk long run, the character, the easiest ones to remember are the ones, and I know you were saying you hate when they rewrite the traits all the time, through a book. But, in genre fiction, of course, they're, I've got two books here, so they're the ones that, James Bond, who doesn't remember all his traits, his guns and his women and, all that stuff. And then, crime fiction's a big one. This Inspector Frost, he starts out, I think in series, those traits might work well.
Yeah, I agree with you.
In that, and even at the beginning, he was this heavy smoker, and then and I think Inspector Banks does it too, through the series, they have to give up, there's things like that. And then, of course, there's Hercule Poirot, who we all know, and that's maybe why they're so easy to get into movies as well. So they're probably the ones that are in Sherlock Holmes, they're really easy to remember. I know with when I was writing Heloise, my crime fiction, I had to really decide in the beginning if I was going to go that sort of way with, gimmick sort of device of traits that she had that was just her. And that is one way to go. But I, in the end, decided, and then you have to go overboard. It might be sort of so she was really heavily, in the 1800s, where she was heavily into kung fu and had some, gold amulets or, weapons. But no, so in the end I went for, hopefully she doesn't have a lot of gimmicks. So hopefully she just reads as a novel. But then I was looking at, so as far as, like, I don't know if you read this, she was at the Byron Festival last year.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just reading, if anybody can't read the title, it's The Animated, it's by Kayla Ray Whitaker.
Yeah, I just thought her characterization was brilliant. And even today when I was writing notes on it, I remembered her name was Sharon, and I don't remember anybody's name. And I just thought the voice, I think her voice was really strong through dialogue, probably, and action. But I think just you could really hear her. And actually, I think she probably sounded a lot like the author, you know, because you remember she had a very distinct accent herself. So I thought that was, and even, so you hear her voice and it's from her point of view. And even at the end when you, so this is another device, but, you know, another way of doing character too. At the end, you realise everything she thought about herself and her friend was, not everything, but some of it was false. So that also tells you about her as well. So I think that's, which brings me to Strout and Egan. You know how they do a lot of other characters revealing character. So that's another way you might want to write character, is you've got your character, but then another character. So with my Heloise and her maid, like her maid, so Heloise will think certain things about beauty and blah, 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 and then her maid will kind of be really disdainful of her. So it just tells you a bit about both the characters when you write two characters or many more like these writers do. And the other day I read this, Wimmera, and it was, the voice, the child's voice was so great. And also, like, that poor kid doesn't know what's happening, but the horrible thing is you as the reader know what's happening. He just does it so well, and knowing the two characters. So I was just looking at some of the books I've read lately on character and maybe how they've done it. I did write down how I think, you know, like I said, you know, one way is to juxtapose your characters. They can sort of reveal things about each other. I think another way for me, if I'm writing different characters, which I've been thinking about, is especially because one's, you know, that crime fiction, so she's a bit more flighty, you know, and then there's the other characters. I think, and I used to be very interested in drama and plays, so I do think, I think maybe for me, I'd try to get into a role. Like, I think maybe I role play a character as I'm writing it, whether it's third person, first person, or whatever, because that must be, you know, how you see these people. Like even Egan, so Egan, actually another way too that I've noticed with Egan is she writes in different styles, not just like different voice. So I think Wimmera was different voice, but she writes different style. Like even there's one part with the teenager and she writes everything in PowerPoints, you know, and then there's another sort of schmarmy character who's having troubles and he has footnotes on everything, you know, and then there's another character who's quite academic in how she sets out her inner thoughts. So I thought that was, you know, there's so many different ways of portraying character.
Yeah, I just wanted to return to something that you mentioned. Yep. You were saying you were role playing, because this was something I think about a lot. This idea of kind of method acting, if you like, but for writing. Yes. I do quite a lot, and I think when I don't tell people that, because when you tell people that you engage in that practice, it sounds like you're going back to become a Victorian era detective, or you are going to, you know, I think people tend to imagine you're really literally inhabiting the world of the character, but sometimes, I don't know about you, for me, it's more of like an atmospheric or a tonal thing.
Oh yes, it's to get the tone right. It's to get the voice right. Yes.
Yeah. I was wondering, could you just, I know it's a tricky thing to explain, but could you elaborate a little bit more on how you sort of go about that process?
Let me see if I wrote anything down. So I've mostly just written that. I just, it's really funny because people do ask me about how, you know, my crime fiction is just so different from, say, Mina or my short fiction. Because the short fiction is contemporary mostly. I think you have to, like you said, it's very much the voice. You have to very much hear it in your mind. I think a lot of writers, a lot of emerging writers might, you know, it takes time. It is a craft. You might write, because you're still learning just how to write. And it might even just be as simple as how to write grammatically. I think it's just a layer. It's just a further layer. Then you get to a point where you're not writing what Mirandi would be, how she would be reacting or how she would say something. You start to hear, and I don't know, it's really funny because I think it's like working different muscles, like if you're exercising different things. Like, you know, I just I'm almost in a different mood when I write the different genres, say, you know, like Heloise, and I'm not saying anything is easier than the other. They're all as equally difficult. But I'm, you know, with Heloise, I might be more flippant, you know, and she'll say things and I'll giggle, you know, like just really silly. And then, you know, but then the other fiction, you know, I'll be more in a more serious frame of mind. It's just, it is very hard to explain. But for me, it is, it's like getting in the mood of that voice that you want it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's really interesting, what's really important is, like you were saying before, just read, you know, like just read. Like you're not going to copy anything, but just to sort of immerse yourself in what sort of maybe style or what you're trying to write too, you know.
Yeah, and I also think, like, you're right, you're not going to copy anyone, but I think it's also normal at some point to mimic. If you come across somebody who's doing something that you've never experienced before, or it's different and it's new, I think it's quite normal to sort of absorb a little bit of that temporarily. And I think that's fine. Like, I still do it now. I remember last year when I read Pond by Claire Louise Bennett. I'm not sure if you've read that. But it's totally different from how I write. It's really like prolix, and it's this linked series of short stories. It's almost all interiority, so it would probably drive you mad because because all of these like little, she'll be running a bath and it's like, you know, 1,800 things that happened to her while she was running the bath, little thoughts that she had, or, you know, whatever it is. But it was totally different to how I write or what I write about. And yet, when I read that book or that collection, there was a brief period where my writing kind of became a lot, not like hers, but I could see that something in my brain had attached, must have enjoyed at some level what she was doing, because I was wanting to incorporate all of this, you know, reflection and these sort of parenthetical asides, and the sentences that I was writing were much more fulsome and descriptive than, whereas I sort of naturally tend to be more clean in my approach to language. And I think it's like, it's not a terrible thing when you're really affected by somebody's work. I think you naturally absorb it for a little while, but it's just about being conscious of that so that you're not mimicking it or...
well, you certainly shouldn't copy, but I think some writers too, like I know with Eugenides, I think he just has a turn of phrase, like that's just so beautiful that, you know, like sometimes, you know, beautiful phrases I will write down and put it on my sticky notes just to, not to copy, but just to sort of be inspired by, I guess.
Yeah.
Is Papaya Sunsets. I'll never get over that. How many people write about sunsets that, you know, he wrote Papaya Sunsets or The Colour of a Blush. And I'm just like, yes,
yeah.
I want to write that. So, you know, sometimes I think just seeing somebody else's skill, I think that's just, like I was saying before, it's all about the craft of, you know, learning your craft, and that it takes time and practice. And some are faster than others, don't get me wrong, but certainly sort of immersing yourself in it helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's like, I feel like that's advice that sometimes gets scoffed at because it's trolled out so often. But I truly think reading is one of the most valuable things you can do.
Absolutely. So what I try to do is this is what I try to do. I try to do my writing in the morning after I've dropped the kids off, and I try to do, after the procrastinating, I try to do a bit of writing. And then in the afternoon, before pickup, I try to do a bit of reading or research, just to sort of, and usually I'll try, well, anything's good, but yeah, so that's what I'll try and do in a day, to sort of work.
Do you find that kind of, like, is that a process that you've worked with for a long time? Like, how long did it take you before you were like, this is how I work best?
Probably, it helped when the kids got a bit older. Then you're not so sporadic. But certainly doing the PhD, because then you get to a certain stage in your PhD where you just want to get on with the novel, that you're doing the research and the thesis part of things. But it certainly shows you how to put aside those hours, I guess, that just have to be done. And then I guess once you're actually published, then it's still, that work has to be done. So I'd say maybe that sort of, having that pattern of work has been probably just the last 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4 years. Yeah, just since the PhD, sort of getting into the rhythm of, and I mean, that's not every day. Like I said, that's an ideal day. But you know, life happens as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's something to be said for like working out what works best for you, and whether you can sandwich that around, you know, part-time work or study or caring responsibilities for children or parents or whatever it is. It's really hard because writing for most of us is never going to feel like a full-time job, and it's never going to be something we devote all our time to. But the sooner you kind of work out, you know, even if it's something as simple as I work best in the morning or I work best late at night, I think that's really valuable.
And they, you know, authors do all work differently. Like I've listened to one author who does I think she does something like 5,000 words a day.
Oh my God.
And then she gets to the 5,000th word and that's it. Even if it's in the middle of a sentence, she'll go away. So it's like, that's it for her. So for her, it's really like work. And then, you know, and I try to do what I do, but then, you know, other writers I know who, you just write when you can, you know. I remember actually when my kids were little, I was in a tutorial and I was sort of saying, oh, I don't get much time to write, you know, and I was sort of making up excuses for not writing. And then we had to read, I think it was Alice Munro, and she, an interview with her, and she said she got up something like 4 or 5 in the morning so she could write before the kids got up. And I was like, oh. Obviously I'm not committed enough.
Yeah, but having kids I don't have children, but I imagine that's like a next level of, it's a responsibility that you can't just walk away from, unlike a part-time job or even a full-time job.
No, and it's just tiring anyway. So, you know, and writing's tiring. It's not like, it's not easy.
Yeah, no, it is. You're right. Well, we might wrap it up there on that note.
Okay.
We'll jump out. You and I will continue for a little while with the Toolkits participants. We'll wrap up this live broadcast session now. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Thank you, Mirandi, for your presence.
Thank you very much for having me.
Please grab Mirandi's books from the library. I only have one here, but grab them from the bookstore, grab them from the library. She's an exquisite writer.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Our next Toolkits live broadcast session takes place on the 15th of May. It's also a Tuesday, and we'll be joined by Claire Judy Coleman, an author, poet, and essayist of an exceptional calibre, and she'll be talking with us about setting. So So I hope you'll tune in for that. And the first live broadcast for Toolkits non-fiction is tomorrow. That's Tom Doig with Be Fantastic, Fiona Wright. So if that's up your alley, you can make it 2 out of 2. But in the meantime, it's good night from us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.